Hello, my lovely anatomists and physiologists. We are ready to talk about pH regulation or acid-base balance. And so let's remind ourselves of our terms. So anything that is considered an acid is going to have a low pH value. We're going to see it in the range of 0 to 6.99 on a pH scale. And what that's really saying is we have a high hydrogen ion concentration. Whereas when we talk about bases, we're going to have a high pH. So this is a number 7.1 to 14 on the pH scale. And what we can say here is we have a high hydroxide ion concentration. And remember, both acids and bases are equally damaging to our cells, right? So one isn't better than the other. Now, when we talk about acid-base balance, we'll see that there's three basic ways that this is going to be taken care of. So one we can say is a protein buffer. And so let's go over here in the corner and remind ourselves, what is a buffer? A buffer is a molecule that can temporarily store hydrogen ion. And I like to always remind folks that if you can store it, that means you can put it in the cupboard and you can take it out of the cupboard, right? So you can see a buffer either bind with hydrogen ion or release hydrogen ion, depending. And so buffers are going to prevent fluctuations in pH. And very often we see that buffers are either weak acids or weak bases. So now if we go back to our description of a protein buffers are buffers because proteins are made of amino acids, which are weak acids. So any protein that has a free amino acid end is going to have this ability to pair up with hydrogen ion or release hydrogen ion as needed. And so we'll see that these are going to be important. Our book tells us about 2/3 of our buffering power in the blood is coming from these buffering proteins. It's our primary buffering source inside of the cell, and that's just facts, so we don't really have to write that down. But let's mention hemoglobin as important buffer in our red blood cells. We talked about hemoglobin extensively throughout the course, so we should have a pretty good idea. So not only is hemoglobin important as the little boat to transport our oxygen molecules around, carbon dioxide molecules around, but also it's important in helping to act as a buffer. When we talk next about bicarbonate ion, we'll see that this is a super important buffer in body fluids. So whereas maybe the protein buffer, let's go ahead and just mark it more important inside cells. We can talk about the bicarbonate ion as important in the extracellular fluid, which we know is our plasma and our interstitial fluid. And what we'll see here is your bicarbonate ion we've already talked about before. So if you remember, we're going to see bicarbonate ion has this strong connected relationship with our respiratory system. So if we go ahead and see carbon dioxide gas and water combined together, they make carbonic acid, and carbonic acid is H2CO3. And we have our arrows here to show that this is a reversible reaction. And then we can do another set of reversible arrows to represent carbonic acid easily breaks down into hydrogen ion and bicarbonate ion. And so here is our carbonic acid, which is a weak acid, and here is our bicarbonate ion. And so the beautiful part about this relationship is the respiratory system can be important in helping us to regulate our blood and body fluid pH, just because we can exhale the extra CO2. And when we do that, it's driving this reaction I've written on the screen to the left, meaning we're left with CO2 being released into the atmosphere and water being left in the body. So that's totally fine. Or, you know, if our blood is too alkaline and we don't have enough hydrogen ion, we're driving the reaction the way I originally wrote it, where you slow down your respirations, you retain CO2, CO2 combines with water, you get carbonic acid, which is giving you a release of hydrogen ion. Now, in our body fluids, remember, we have like a whole ton of sodium. So what we'll see is the sodium will pair with that bicarbonate ion to make sodium bicarbonate. And sodium bicarbonate can then pair with a strong acid like hydrochloric acid, or we should say like react. And when that happens, we get carbonic acid, which is a weak acid. And then that takes us directly back to this conversation here. So now we see how bicarbonate ion can help us take a help us take a strong acid and convert it to a weak acid. And then the respiratory system can help us exhale the CO2 and drive the reaction so that we're left with water, which is no big deal. It didn't actually finish my reaction. So where we had our sodium bicarbonate combining with or reacting with hydrochloric acid, not only do we make carbonic acid, but we also make a salt. We make sodium chloride. Sodium chloride is going to just separate in the body fluids as sodium and chloride. And so again, this is going to be something that we can easily take care of. Now, when we're talking about acid-base balance, we'll see that we get regulation from the respiratory system, respiratory regulation, and from the urinary system. So when we talk about respiratory regulation, if we increase our amount of CO2 in our bodies, what we're really doing is increasing our amount of carbonic acid, which is going to be lowering our blood pH. And all we have to do to manage this is to increase our exhale. So one of our major driving forces to breathe is our exhale because of a buildup of CO2. So when we have a buildup of CO2, we're actually affecting our blood pH, but we can regulate this simply by exhaling our breath. The opposite scenario here, if you have too little carbon dioxide gas in your blood, that means you're going to have a reduced amount of carbonic acid. And so now your blood pH is going to be a little bit elevated. And so this is simply taken care of by slowing your breath. Now here, there's a little balance, because if you slow your breath too much, you're not getting the oxygen that your cells need. So this is kind of like a fine-tuned situation, and we can't just take care of every every issue necessarily by just slowing down our breath. Clearly, we can't stop our breath. Now, this is where some folks like to recommend for people to breathe in a paper bag so that you're slowing down your breath, but you're also increasing your level of carbon dioxide gas because you're breathing this old air. And that's really not a good solution because depending on the respiratory problem, the person might have trouble breathing because of asthma or something else going on. And so this could be dangerous for certain conditions. So rather than recommending for people to breathe into a paper bag, you just want to encourage people to slow down and deepen their breaths. When we are talking about this abnormal levels of carbon dioxide gas, we have a name. So when we have a really high level of CO2, we can call that hypercapnia. And so this can be caused by respiratory distress. So issues such as pneumonia might make it difficult to do proper exchange. Congestive heart failure can also be a possible source of hypercapnia. And when we're looking at a reduced carbon dioxide gas level here, we can call this one hypocapnia, where you have a reduction in the amount of CO2. Okay, when we are talking then about how our CO2 can affect our pH, we can then describe what is called respiratory acidosis. Respiratory acidosis, where you have an excessive amount of CO2, which is causing you to have an acidic pH. And here you're just going to, again, increase your exhale. You're going to increase your respiratory rate. So you can adjust using your breath. We can see too that the kidney can assist. It can increase the bicarbonate ion reabsorption, and it can increase your hydrogen ion excretion. So the two body systems that are involved in acid-base balance are the respiratory and the kidneys. When we talk about the flip side of this, when we talk about having an elevated blood pH, we call that respiratory alkalosis. And this is saying you have too little CO2. And here, when we talk about slowing the breathing, we're going to decrease the respiratory rate. But again, you can only decrease it to so far till we have, a significant problem here. At the kidney, we'll see a decrease in the production of our bicarbonate ion. And we'll see a reabsorption of the hydrogen ion. So the kidney can help us here kind of compensate for what's going on. When we talk about the activity of the kidney, the role of the kidney, what we see is that we get sodium ion reabsorption at the proximal convoluted tubule, in exchange for hydrogen ion. So at the PCT, we're actually reabsorbing sodium and then we're putting hydrogen ion into the tubular fluid. And then we see the proximal convoluted tubule cells will actually produce bicarbonate ion and send it to the paratubular capillary. So at the proximal convoluted tubule, we're exchanging sodium and hydrogen ion. So we're getting rid of hydrogen ion. We're actually producing bicarbonate ion and we're putting that into the paratubular capillary. So that means back into the bloodstream. If we have elevated CO2 levels, the PCT is going to retain and make and retain, we should say, bicarbonate ion and excrete or secrete hydrogen ion. So it's actually at the proximal convoluted tubule that we can have this exchange of our bicarbonate ion and our hydrogen ion. The other piece of information to pay attention to at the kidney is something that we already mentioned. When we talk about the kidney, remember, we're going to see the hydrogen ion is going to compete with potassium ion to exchange with sodium ion. So what we're seeing here is if you're exchanging sodium ion and hydrogen ion, then you're going to have elevated potassium level because it's not exchanging, right? If you have problems with your potassium level, then that can lead to problems regulating pH. If you have problems regulating your pH, that can lead to problems regulating your potassium levels. So we have a very close connection there. We mentioned the respiratory acidosis and respiratory alkalosis as related to problems with the respiratory tract. We also have what is described as metabolic acidosis and metabolic alkalosis. And the difference here has to do with the production of the bicarbonate ion. So when we look at metabolic acidosis, we can see a deficiency in bicarbonate ion. So we're getting the presence of organic acids from metabolism. We're getting excessive ketone bodies from breaking down fats and so forth. In the case of the metabolic alkalosis, we have an excess of bicarbonate ion. Now, our body is dealing with the pH imbalance regardless of the source, but in terms of what's happening with the body, it's going to be different. So if you have respiratory acidosis and alkalosis, you might be able to adjust that with your respiratory system, but if it's damage or disease to the respiratory system causing that problem, then you may have more trouble regulating that. The last little thing I want to mention, this is something that has been part of our departmental final exams in the past, so please pay attention. When we talk about our pH balance and we're looking at the normal blood pH, we're going to see that a normal blood pH, we've said already in the cardiovascular system, has a range of 7.35 to 7.45. So we consider it slightly basic. If you have anything less than 7.35, we're going to consider that acidosis. Anything greater than 7.45 is going to be alkalosis. And what we should pay attention to here also is that your pH scale is a logarithmic scale. So numbers that look like small changes on the scale are actually significant when we're talking about your pH levels. All right, y'all. I think that's really all the things I want to say about chapter 26. So we are done. So take care of yourselves and each other.